There's a rumor in my town that on Halloween night, if you walk past 7 black gates and go to sleep, you will find yourself in front of the 7 gates of hell. The gates can be anything from a doorway to 2 sticks propped up on the ground, as long as they are open and you can see past them. I thought it was a myth at first, and, like all rebellious teenagers, I decided to try it out. I really wish I hadn't, though. I spent a few hours walking around my neighborhood and plotting a course, and when the sun finally fell past the horizon and the air got that familiar night chill, I went on a walk past 7 black gates around my neighborhood before returning home and laying in my bed. I didn't fall asleep immediately. I was really excited, but at some point, my eyes began to get really heavy, and I managed to fall asleep. It was an out-of-body experience, and I could feel myself tossing and turning before I opened my eyes and was met with a very strange sight. I was inside the mouth of a cave, which seemed to have been cut from pure black obsidian. I could faintly see my reflection in the glassy walls of the cave, but I didn't quite look like myself. I was extremely thin and naked, with leathery, cracked skin and a gaunt face devoid of any real defining features. As I peered into the cave, I could see a figure slowly walking towards me. The figure was an impossibly tall, easily towering above me man, whose features were veiled beneath a heavy cloak-like darkness. In the dim light of the entrance, I could just barely make out a pair of black, beady eyes and a jagged, toothless smile on torn lips. When the figure spoke, it came out in a scratchy and impossibly deep tone.
Welcome to hell, traveler.
He chuckled and pointed his hands towards the back of the cave, where I could just make out became numb, and I got the sense that I was moving closer towards the door. My mind screamed that this was wrong, that I shouldn't be here, but struggling against the unseen restraints didn't work and sent waves of needle-like pain shooting through my body. I gave up trying to fight it and let myself get dragged in, not knowing what horrors would await me inside. As I entered through the first gate, I was met with the sight of a world filled with fire. The sky was awash with a malevolent flame which rained down countless mutilated and burnt corpses. Despite falling from far beyond the limits of my sight, they didn't die, but instead crumpled into broken fleshy piles, sobbing so loudly that it almost drowned out the crackling of the fires above. One of the broken husks crawled its way towards me, raking its bony fingers into my flesh as it crawled up my body. Despite not being able to move, the pain was sharp, and each time the husk crawled further up my body, I wanted to scream out in pain. Eventually, the husk and I were eye to eye, and it stared at me with blackened, sightless holes before its mouth opened and it spoke.
Traveler, we are the desiccated corpses who did not get a proper burial. We are to stay here until the day of judgment arrives.
After saying this, the husk's fingers began to lose strength, and it fell to the ground, gasping for air, as my body began moving forward once more towards a building made up of an ash-plastered concrete that none of the husks seemed to be able to get near, even as they fell from the skies above. As I entered through the doors of the building, I saw that the interior was divided up into countless cells like that of a prison. Each cell contained a person undergoing a different type of torture. One room had a man floating, as if suspended in water, clutching at his throat as his purple face did everything it could to take in the air which would never reach his lungs. Another room had a woman being sawed in half, ever so slowly. Her body seemed to repair itself before being sawed through again. I continued moving forwards and eventually came to another impossibly tall figure who turned to me and said,
Traveler, these are the tortured souls. The people who tortured themselves in life and continue to do so in death by their own devices.
I silently continued past him. Entering through, I was met this time with a beautiful and shady forest. There was silence all around me, punctuated every so often by an odd rustling sound from which I could not discern the location. The trees were incredibly tall, and all had countless leaves which shaded the path from the harsh sunlight above. The trees stretched on for as far as the eye could see, and after what seemed like an eternity of walking through an endlessly shaded expanse, I made it to a clearing with another figure and another door. Unlike the previous figures, this one did not stand silently, waiting for my approach, but instead seemed to be kneeling, seemingly oblivious to my presence, and shaking as if it were crying. As I approached, however, the figure turned its head towards me and said in a shaky voice,
Traveler, these are the people who threw away the greatest gift given to them. Their silence is unending, and they will never know what wonders awaited them beyond.
As the figure said this, I felt a chill settle over me. I knew what this was, and as I looked up, I saw that the branches of these impossibly large trees did not have leaves, but rather had countless bodies, each suspended in some way from the boughs. Looking at each of them, I could see their stories. A man whose wife had left him, a woman who had lost her job, a child whose parents had said that they were a mistake. I felt hot tears roll freely down my face as my body fell to the ground. For a while, I had control of my body, and all I could do was weep openly next to the figure. Eventually, though, the numbness returned, and my body stood back up, continuing through the next gate as the bodies silently swayed in the breeze behind me. Through the next door, I was almost blinded by the golden walls, polished marble, and meticulous decorations. Men and women in suits could be seen running from all manner of foul creatures and masked people, every once in a while stumbling in their fancy suits or tripping over an ornate chair. At one point, I witnessed a plump, balding man in a suit get slashed open by a lion, which proceeded to gnaw at his entrails. Before the lion was finished consuming him, however, his body began to break apart, and the lion renewed its chase with a similar-looking man who began running away just like the first. Despite the chaos around me, however, the walls and floors remained clean and sparkling. As I approached the door, I could see another dark figure leaning against the wall and watching the chaos around it. The figure's face turned towards me.
Hey there, traveler. These are the people who let their greed corrupt them. Those that sought to use their power and influence to harm those around them, or to squander their wealth on baubles and trinkets, while their common man struggled beside them.
Even if I had been able to speak, I'm not sure what I would have said to that. I continued on silently as the men and women in suits forever ran from their tormentors. The next gate led me to another room filled with countless screams like the first. I saw a man laying on a bed as leathery whips tore large hunks of flesh off his body. Every time one wound would open, another would scar over, leaving an incredibly thick and leathery plot of skin, which would be more painful once it tore open again. In another room, a man was bound to a chair and screamed as faceless children cut and mutilated his genitals. I didn't need the figure to tell me what this was. I knew, and for the first time, I actually felt a sense of satisfaction at seeing the torture being brought down upon these people. Nonetheless, When I encountered the figure, it told me what I had anticipated I'd hear.
Traveler, these foul, pathetic excuses for human beings are the rapists and sex offenders who pay for the crimes they committed during their time on Earth to those who could not defend themselves.
The figure seemed to watch with a sense of glee and happiness. Watch with a sense of glee and happiness. I had seen the devastation brought on by such acts, and for the first time throughout this entire journey, thought that this was a pretty fitting punishment. Unable to say anything or slow my body's movement, though, I silently continued, not looking back as the sharp screams continued to echo throughout the room. Through the next door, I entered another room similar to the last one. However, this room didn't have screams of agony, but instead, I felt soft, angry whispers spoken through clenched jaws all around me. Accusations of lying all around me. Accusations of lying, or cheating, or stealing seemed to be coming from everywhere and from nowhere at the same time. Ringing of a gunshot echoing throughout the room. Once the echoing had ceased, however, I once again heard the muffled, angry voices. As I continued my walk, I eventually came across a man and a woman bickering in one of the corners in the same hushed tones before both began stabbing each other repeatedly. Neither of them seemed to be fazed as their blood splattered across the ground. As I continued on, another room had a woman pleading towards a masked individual who began to shovel dirt down into the hole she was standing in. Another person sat in a chair, their head wrapped in a soaking towel as water dripped down on them from above, slowly drowning them. This time, I did not see the figure until it was already behind me. Its long, talon-like fingers wrapped around my neck, and its harsh voice softly spoke into my ear.
Traveler, these are the people who murdered and killed. The people who knowingly took the lives of others. Some of them have found punishment for their crimes while on Earth, and some of them did not. Regardless, each and every one of them is now here.
The voice sent another wave of chills down my spine, as its words painted a picture as vivid as any movie I'd ever watched. I shuddered, thinking of the crimes that these people had committed, but continued on towards the final gate, which opened before I even touched it. This is it. The final gate. The nightmare is almost over, I thought to myself as my body continued to move. As the door finished opening, however, all I could see was an all-consuming darkness from within. All the figures I'd come across thus far stepped from the shadows of the doorway, trailed lastly by a wrinkled and hunched old man with a cane. The man's eyes met mine, and I saw something that I had seen before. A calm knowing of the ultimate end that we all must come to accept. I expected the man to, so I was genuinely surprised when his voice sounded completely normal and unlike those of the figures around him.
I'm sorry, my boy, but you can't go through that final door just yet. It's not quite your time. You've still got some growing up to do. But don't worry, you will be back soon. And when you come back, you'll find out what waits for you beyond this final gate.
I wanted to ask him what was on the other side. I wanted to say something, anything. I wanted to be able to move my body, to do something other than just stand there. But I couldn't, and after a few moments, my eyes began to get rather heavy. They closed, and after floating through darkness, I opened my eyes to see the familiar sight of my bedroom window. I rolled out of bed, and the first thing that I noticed was that my shirt was drenched in sweat. As I thought back, the images of what I saw ran through my head as clear as the night before. In fact, that was all I was thinking about for almost the whole year, and before I knew it, it had become Halloween night again. I didn't dare go outside that night, though. I just went to bed. Just like the previous year, though, it took me a while to sleep, and again, I eventually fell into a deep darkness and awoke in front of the first gate of hell. This time, though, the gate was behind me, and I was covered in a robe of darkness. I also felt taller. In front of me, there was a meek-looking teenager, much like myself. He was staring at me with a gaunt, expressionless face. I could tell he wanted to say something, but he didn't. My body then became numb, and I said to him in a scratchy and incredibly deep tone, unlike my normal voice,
"Welcome to hell, traveler."
I felt myself chuckle as my hand raised to open the gate for him. The boy walked silently inside with an expression that looked like he was fighting something and struggling against an immense pain. Sadly, just before he entered the room, I saw the fight leave his eyes as he resigned himself in the same way I had. What I saw was the gatekeeper. I had somehow become the gatekeeper. Now, as I walked down these halls, I wish I had never walked past those gates last year on Halloween, because as I'm watching this boy walk through the gates, I've come to realize I'm not really sure if I'm ready to know what lies beyond the seventh gate. Hey everyone, thank you so much, like seriously so much, for listening to that last story. I really hope you enjoyed it. That last story was my own take on the Seven Gates of Hell story. You can find it on the Creepypasta fandom website, and the music is the royalty-free background track by Roosh Sounds. I really enjoyed recording this story and plan to do a lot more in the near future. As you can probably tell, I'm pretty new to the streaming and recording scene, but I've been really into reading and listening creepypastas for quite some time now. So this has kind of been a daily thing for probably over a year now. In fact, if you want to check out some other really amazing YouTubers that do this type of thing, I definitely would recommend artists like The Dark Somnium, Romnex, or Mr. Creepypasta. So big thanks to them for all the amazing and high quality content that they put out. I highly, highly, highly encourage you to go check out their stuff if you want to hear more stories like this or just want a good scare when we're all stuck in content. Though, please follow me as I plan to put out more stories like this in the future. So, yeah, thanks and have a wonderful night.